my name is Patricia Salmon. I'm the retired curator of history from the Staten Island Museum. I've written 5 books about Staten Island history, and I'm on the board of the Tottenville Historical Society, and I am the historian for the Friends of Olmsted Beale House. Well, the establishment of New Dorp is a very interesting story. It comes from the fact that the first permanent settlement on Staten Island was developed in 1661. And that came about because there were 3 previous establishments of communities on Staten Island, but the 3 of them were wiped out by the Native Americans. The final straw that broke the camel's back, shall we say, was in 1655, when a Native American woman was accused of stealing a peach. And she was wrongly accused. That led to the wipeout of the last community. We see that approximately 6 years later, the first permanent establishment settled at Arrow Car, which is sort of the area by St. Mary's Cemetery. So that's 1661. 10 years later, 1671, there's another village established on Staten Island. But there was no name for the original establishment. So they began calling the first establishment Old Town and the new establishment New Town. And New Dorp is actually the Dutch word for town. So it was New Town and Old Town. So that is how we came to have New Dorp on Staten Island. And today it's now 350 years old, that community. So it's been around for quite some time. Going back to the time when New Dorp was settled, it went by a number of names afterwards. It was called Stony Brook and Dover and the Elm Tree Light. The Elm Tree Light is very interesting because the elm tree stood at the end of New Dorp Lane, same New Dorp Lane we know today, and ships coming in over the ocean were using it as a navigational aid. That's how big this tree was. And eventually, of course, it died back, but there was a real lighthouse put in where the elm tree once stood. We see 200 years later almost that the New Dorp Light itself is built in 1854, and that's built up on a hill, and then it was used as a navigational aid. There were a number of racetracks in the New Dorp community. In fact, the Vanderbilt family was involved with the racing in that locale. It seems that New Dorp Lane, because it was so straight and so flat, was maintained as a racetrack all the way from Amboy Road all the way down to the ocean. And Cornelius Vanderbilt and William Vanderbilt, you know, they were very involved with it, as I said. And they even encouraged the construction of the Patton House, which was built by Colonel John Patton in the 1830s or so. And it was a long-lived hotel that stood at the top of New Dorp Lane by Amboy Road. In fact, it was around during the Civil War, and many famous people stayed there. Santa Anna, General Winfield Scott, Jenny Lind, the list goes on and on. But back to the race courses. There was also another race course on the Vanderbilt property. The Vanderbilts owned dozens and dozens of acres along New Dorp Lane, down by the beach, on both sides of New Dorp Lane, as a matter of fact. So on William H. Vanderbilt's property, where Miller Field Park is today, there was another race course, and it was called the Clubhouse Grounds Trotting Course. Up New Dorp Lane, make a right on Amboy Road, and you find another race course. It was called the Seaview Park Association's race course. So as I said, it was a popular location for racing horses, and that's what wealthy people did in the 1800s. They, you know, and as we all know, the Vanderbilts absolutely loved their horses. The story of New Dorp is interwoven with the story of the Vanderbilt family, actually. The Vanderbilts came over from Holland, they settled in Long Island, and then they moved to the New Dorp section of Staten Island. They established a farm, and the man that we most know with the Vanderbilts is the Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt. His father actually moved from New Dorp, went to Port Richmond, and that's where the Commodore was born. But the Commodore, when he had children, he thought that his son William H. was not a very bright person. So he sort of banished him to the family farm out in New Dorp because he didn't really want him working with Cornelius and his boats and later his railroad. So he sent him to the farm in New Dorp. And William H. actually made a huge success of the farm in New Dorp. He was making $12,000 a year in like the 1850s, around 1860. So he was very successful. And he also got involved with the railroad on Staten Island. So if it wasn't for William H. Vanderbilt, we might not have the line that we have today that runs out to Tottenville. If you look at the old maps, you can see that the Vanderbilts did own ample acreage in the town of New Dorp. And about 1882 or so, William H. decided that the family was so prominent on Staten Island and pretty much had their roots on Staten Island, he would like to establish a cemetery for the family. And there is obviously a cemetery known as the Vanderbilt Cemetery. It's on the western side of Moravian Cemetery. And he, brought in the best people of the day, Richard Morris Hunt, the most well-known architect of the time, to design the Vanderbilt Mausoleum, which today is the greatest tomb to the dead in the United States. It's a neo-Romanesque structure, and it has room for 72 people. You can only be buried there if you're a direct male descendant of the Commodore. He also brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the greatest landscape architect of that time. And Frederick Law Olmsted was brought in to lay out the grounds of the Vanderbilt Cemetery. Of course, right next to it is Moravian Cemetery, which we're somewhat beyond knowing the exact time people began being buried there. But we do know that the first church was built in 1763. That same church is still used today, but as a cemetery office for the Moravian Cemetery. We do know the cemetery was incorporated in 1842, and we do know that the church that exists today was built in 1837. It's probably the most popular cemetery on Staten Island. It's well kept, well manicured. It even has its own historian, Richard Simpson. Another prominent location at New Dorp was the Seaside Nursery. They opened this nursery on the shoreline at New Dorp Beach in 1881. And the hospital actually, they cared for children, no matter what the race, the nationality, it didn't matter to them. All sickly children could be brought to the hospital. And they also allowed the parents, if the parents were able, to stay at the hospital in order to help care for the children. So officially it became a hospital in 1887. And they also had a floating hospital starting around coming to Staten Island in the 1880s, where they brought in ill children by boat. And this was active into the 1920s. And the Seaside Hospital itself, it was active until about 1940 or so. At that time, we had World War II going on in 1941. They took the setting of the hospital and they started using it for soldiers who were injured in the war. Later years, it became a nursing home until finally around 1964 or so, it closed down. New Dorp is a fascinating place. I mean, even modern day New Dorp or 20th century New Dorp is so interesting. The Lane Theater, I mean, it's a landmark on Staten Island. It literally is the landmark because the interior has New York City landmark designation. It opened in 1938 with a movie called 100 Men and a Baby. It was a Deanna Durbin movie, and it was such a popular theater in its day. It was the Depression. And you could go into this theater, and while it was restrained in its architecture, It still had amazing murals on the ceiling, constellations and you know, outer space type of stars were drawn on the ceiling. Mrs. Rosemary's dance school. I mean, Mrs. Rosemary was an amazing person. She started a dance school in New Dorp that's still active today, even though she passed away several years ago. It's Mrs. Rosemary and her 3 daughters who saved the St. George Theater. And today we can be thankful to them for the showcase that is in the St. George community on Staten Island. We could probably go on and talk about that area, including the historic houses that were or are located there. The Britton House. It was begun in 1670. I mean, it was amazing. The Britons lived there from about the late 1700s until the the late 1600s to the early 1700s. And then they rebought it again, and they lived there from about 1874 or so until about 1915. In fact, Dr. Nathaniel Lord Britton and his wife, Elizabeth Knight Britton, donated the house to what was then the Staten Island Association of Arts and Sciences. Today we call it the Staten Island Museum. The Staten Island Museum turned around and donated it to the Staten Island Historical Society, and this was in 1951. And we see in 1964, Laurie McMillan and the board of the Staten Island Historical Society actually move the house from where it's located at the end of New Dorp Lane, not too far from Cedar Grove Place. They move it to the campus of historic Richmondtown, where you can still see it today. In any event, you know, New Dorp has been a hotbed of history. New Dorp is one of the most interesting communities on Staten Island. I mean, it's almost 350 years old. I mean, there's Revolutionary War history, there's Civil War history, there's Vanderbilt history, there's landmarks and fabulous architecture. You have Miller Field, which is part of Sandy Hook. It's a rich community to study. You can always go to the archives of the Staten Island Museum or Historic Richmondtown to learn more about this community. And it survived, even though the original old town has pretty much disappeared, except, we have some street names, but that Old Town Road is not where the old town was located. In any event, New Dorp is a wonderful place, and I encourage everybody to dig into its history.
Hi, my name is Charlie Perrino. I'm the football statistician and historian here at New Dorp High School. I started as a freshman at New Dorp High School in 1958, graduated in 1962, and I really have been involved in the community since about 1965, where I started working at the Evening Community Center at PS 41. Then I started teaching at PS 41 in 1966, and I moved into the neighborhood in 1971. So I've been here about 65 years. In 1975, I was friends with the trainer, Tom O'Connor. From there, I got friendly with Sal Sommer, the football coach, and Paul Mills, the assistant coach. But I did have Sal Sommer as a gym teacher when I was in high school. They wanted somebody to film the games, but I was attending all the games. I've always attended the football games, but I told them that I really didn't want to look through a little hole in the camera. I want to enjoy the games. But then by 1979, they needed a statistician. And as a math minor, I said, oh, that's right up my alley. So that's when I started doing the stats at the high school. Sal Sommer and I became friendlier, and he was the type that always saved everything, and he wanted to preserve the football history of New Dorp, and he kind of encouraged me to save the memorabilia and save my stats, and then I decided to go back and write a summary of each year. From 1938 to 1947, didn't have many records, so I spent a lot of hours using the microfilm at the St. George Library to get a lot of that information, and Sal Sommer helped with some of that. And then in 1948, when he started coaching at New Dorp, that really changed things for me because he kept scrapbooks from 1948 to 1976. So a lot of the history that I was beginning to accumulate, it was a little easier because I used his scrapbooks. So there was a little gap between 76 and 79. So I did some research, talked to Coach Paul Mills, who coached at that time, got that information. And then from 79 up until 2013, when I completed the book, I had all my own stats and all my own history. So I put all that together and I decided to write the book. But I was missing a couple of pieces. We were able to get the scores of every single game that New Dorp played, and every point that was scored except one. And that was an extra point in the mid-40s. So I decided to call up another one of my high school gym teachers who was in a retirement home at the time, and I said, do you know who kicked the extra point in this particular game? And before I finished my sentence, he said, I did. And I said, bingo. Now the book is complete. We have every point ever scored and the score of every game. Yeah, I want to mention the Curtis-New Dorp rivalry. You should know that New Dorp High School opened in 1936. They had 30 teachers and I think 850 students. By 1938, the physical education teacher, Frank Cassidy, decided that he wanted to form a football team to challenge the powerful Curtis teams. By November, they had a team, but they were only able to play one game. And that game was played on Thanksgiving in 1938 against Mount Loretto. And New Dorp won that game 18-0. Then in 1939, New Dorp had a full squad and they were ready to play a full season. And they scheduled Curtis for Thanksgiving Day. And the Advance really played that up, and they built the game up as Thanksgiving approached. They even printed betting odds in the paper. Curtis was an 8-5 favorite. Curtis wound up winning that game, but that was the start of the New Dorp-Curtis rivalry. And they played that first game at Thompson Stadium in Stapleton before more than 8,000 people. And then in 1948, that was Sal Soma's first year, he wanted to play that game at Thompson Stadium, but on Thanksgiving Day. So New Dorp and Curtis played every game thereafter, from starting with 1949 on Thanksgiving Day. But in 1949, they couldn't play at Thompson Stadium because the stands were deemed unsafe. So they shifted the game to Gabe Stadium in Port Richmond. And then they didn't play for two years. In 52, they started up again, and they played every Thanksgiving till 1978. The total number of games they played up until today is New Dorp has won 41 and Curtis 39. Some other important dates, I guess, in the history of the program were in 1963, they built a new wing onto the school, and they had plans to, they had enough room to build a football field, but they never got around to it until 1969. But that was a key date because in 1969, they opened up the new field against John Adams High School, and for the first time, New Dorp had its own home field. That game was packed, even though it was only one Staten Island team playing. So that was really a key date. And then in 1982, because the school had been getting so overcrowded, they had built the new building here on New Dorp Lane, and 1982 was the last graduating class at the original building on Clawson Street, and 1983 was the first graduating class here, and in 1984 we opened up the football field adjacent to this new building. And then in 2019 we opened up a whole new complex with state-of-the-art artificial turf, scoreboard, PA system, and for the first time an air-conditioned and heated press box. I've completed 43 years as the statistician and historian. I slowed down a little, but I still plan to be at the games taking the stats for the 2022 season. In the early 2000s, we had a Hall of Fame committee, and we decided that if we can get a room in the high school, we wanted to preserve all the rich history of the football program in that room. Then the principal gave us a room, and we got donations from alumni, and we got some grants, and we were able to create this Hall of Fame room. Now, originally, it was to preserve the football history. We mentioned all sports here, and we have one wall where we have all the championships listed from all the different sports, girls and boys. And then in this particular room, we have all the plaques of the football players that have been inducted into the New Dorp Football Hall of Fame. And the room officially opened in 2009. New Dorp was a great town for anybody to grow up in, especially young people. I've seen a lot of changes, but there was so many good things to mention and places for wholesome activities for young people. The first one that comes to mind there was a miniature golf course at the corner of Dorp Lane and Holland Boulevard. The Patricia family ran it, and it was 36 holes, which you really don't see miniature golf courses with 36 holes. Across the street from that was an ice cream place called the Polar Cave, where you could get more than ice cream. They had hamburgers and hot dogs also. Probably one of the most popular places for students on New Dorp Lane was Marty's. That was a great place for teenagers to meet. And then up the block was the Lane Theater, which opened in 1938. And then later on, Bowling on the Green opened up, so you had a place to go bowling in New Dorp. And that was open for many years. So there were really so many things to do.
We moved to New Dorp about 42 years ago. 44 years ago. It was 1977. We had been living in Westerly at the time. We had one daughter. My wife was expecting our second, so we were looking for a place that had a little bit more space for us, plus was convenient, and had stores within reach, because we had one car and I had to take that to work. So I needed to make sure that my wife could get out with any needs that she might have for the kids, as well as we wanted a pleasant place to live. And New Dorp fit the bill perfectly. It has many transportation options. It's a walkable neighborhood. There were all kinds of stores for food. As we got older, there were a lot of terrific restaurants there. Not that we were able to go to those when we had the little kids. There wasn't enough money to do that kind of stuff. But you were in walking distance for doctors, for food stores, for bank, I loved New Dorp. I still do. It's a great place to live. It's a walkable community. And that was kind of the allure for us. The New Dorp Central Civic Association was founded at a time when I think civic associations were prominent throughout the island. It was the glory days of civic associations. There was a lot of concern with development on the island, a lot of concern about what stores and businesses were doing. We first became involved actually when they decided they wanted to change the name of the street we were living on. We were living on New Dorp Plaza, and there was a proposal to change the name to name it after some politician at the time. I didn't want to get involved in all the bureaucracy of changing my address and everything like that. So we protested a little. The name of the street wasn't changed, but we wound up getting involved with the Civic Association and Mike at the time. And Mike was a terrific guy, very outgoing. After Mike, the next major president was Ann Finity, and I served as her vice president at the time, and I was a treasurer of the organization for a while. And then I finally became president of the New Dorp Central Civic Association in mid-1990s. We ran a dining program where one night a month we would go and We'd have a group of people from the Civic Association, and they were allowed to invite their friends, and we would dine at a neighborhood restaurant to kind of give them a little business on an off night for them. We would talk to them ahead of time, work out the menu, but we thought it was important that we bring business to the community. We painted over graffiti in the neighborhoods for a while. We had a graffiti painting program. We had a program where we installed smoke detectors in houses of seniors who didn't have them and should have had them. We worked with the fire department on doing that for a while. And we also worked with our local electeds, whoever they might be at the time. Originally it was John Fusco, then it later became Jimmy Otto, and then it became David Carr. We were kind of important, from my perspective. We tried to be apolitical. It was my belief we should work with whoever's out there. If you have a Republican, you work with him. If it's a Democrat, you work with him. We never chose sides in an election because, again, we were never sure of the outcome, and we wanted to make sure that we could work and reach out with whoever was in office at the time. And that was important to us, and it was important to the surrounding community. We were able then to invite them into the meetings. They would come to our meetings and answer questions that any of the residents might have. And then we got involved with other things. We worked closely with the 122 Precinct Council at the time. We spent a lot of time working on the Boulevard project, working with Kimco Realty to try to make sure that they were bringing things into the neighborhood that would be important for us. Anytime there was a thought to knock down a building or put up new construction, we tried to stay involved in that to make sure it was consistent with the theme of the neighborhood. I guess my biggest regret over all these times is there's been a change in civic associations and people's participation in it. Our new generation does things electronically. They do things online. It's much harder these days to get people to come out physically to a meeting and participate. We were fortunate the last few years being able to work with the public library and hold our meetings in their community room, and that seemed to work really good for us because it was a more central location. When the library was getting renovated and all the books were moved across, our association worked with the library to help stack the shelves and everything like that. So we tried to be a good member of the community, but we also tried not to be anti-business. Frequently there was a tension between residents and businesses, and I just didn't think that was a healthy thing to do. So I tried to make sure that we would work with them. If they were doing something crazy, we would point it out and mention it, but we weren't anti-business, and we've tried to keep that up until now. When I think about the changes, I still think it's a special community in the fact that it's walkable. I think there are a few less options that now exist on the business community. You used to have more clothing stores where people could go and buy clothing for, they were like mini department stores. We don't have as much of that anymore. But again, that's a sign of the changing time. There's a more diverse population in New Dorp. But I think overall, I still think it's a terrific place. And I think it's held up well over time, and I think it's still a very desirable community. We tried to work closely with the schools. We had a member of our executive board would always interface with the local schools to try to see what we could do. We worked with New Dorp High School on, for the holidays, they would paint different displays on the stores up and down the lane. We did that for a couple of years. And we were working with Staten Island Technical High School in our Save the Memories program. And what that was we had students with a tape recorder sit down with a senior member of the community and just talk about, what do you remember about New Dorp? And we did that with at least 12.5 senior residents. We captured that information on tape, we converted it into booklets, and we called them Save the Memories. We had one booklet. We sold out when we printed up. We printed up about 50, 75 copies. They sold out. So we had to gather additional memories and put it, and it was a way for us to kind of preserve the history of what it was like before we got here. And I thought it was an important part of our program. Currently, they have Roseanne Losciavo, who's been working a lot with PS 41. She's been working with Our Lady Queen of Peace, involving them in, we had them involved in a poster contest last year on different themes. And we've worked actually with Mike McMahon's office on a poster contest involving pets. So we're trying to, again, create this relationship with the schools on an ongoing basis. We've worked with the Merchants Association to make sure they have the holiday lighting throughout the neighborhood. We actually were doing Christmas caroling and walking up and down the lane years ago. We would start out in Miss Rosemary's dance studio. We would gather there as a group. We had sheet music. We would walk down the lane, stop in front of any business that was open, and we'd sing a tune or two. And then at the end of that, we would wind up going back to Miss Rosemary's, and there would be a little snack for everybody who had participated. And we did that for a number of years. We've been able to work with the local congressmen. We did Fusco and Otto and Steve Matteo, and we didn't really get to do a lot with David Carr because he's not really our councilman yet, but he's soon to be. But Steve was very supportive over the years, and we've been fortunate. We've tried to cultivate good working relationships because it's, it's to our benefit and to their benefit. And I think we did a good job of that. Steve played a big part in making sure that the New Dorp bid came into fruition. And one of the things that was important to us was he made sure the New Dorp Central Civic Association was represented on their board. We were a non-voting member, but we attend all their executive board meetings, and we have input that we can give them in terms of the impact of the decisions they make on the surrounding residents. And we're also able to bring any resident issues up to the bid as well. The bid's been good for the lane. There was a merchants group years ago, but we didn't really see much happen with that. This is the first time I think we see a real strong focus on making sure the businesses get the support they need. It's been great for New Dorp. My big hope is that, as a society, as we start getting through this post-COVID thing, that we're able to start opening up to having live in-person meetings again. I think the meetings we had in the library were really helpful. We were able to get people to come in. We had Pat Salmon down to talk about history. We had people come. We had Ed Burke and people come from Borough Hall to give us all kinds of updates. It was a chance for the residents to actually physically see and speak to people that have an impact on our community. And I hope we get to a point where we can do that again. Our biggest concern, though, is how do we get this next generation to come to things like that? Like most civic associations, a lot of the people that come to them are older citizens, people that have been established in the community for a while. There are so many other distractions nowadays that to take up people's attention. How do we get people to remember that their home and their community is vital? It's an important part of creating who we are and protecting us going forward. How do we get them involved in that? And that I think is going to be a big challenge going forward.
I'm Rosemary Hillers.
I'm Luann Sorrentino.
And I'm Doreen Cunha, and we are the late Mrs. Rosemary's daughters.
Dancing school opened in 1959.
That's right. And Mom was a young mother at the time, and she needed to make ends meet. So she wanted to teach the local children in the neighborhood how to dance. And she walked into a Suspino Russo post on a Saturday and asked the men there if she can rent it out for Saturdays. And she had 46 children the first year, and each year it doubled. And she charged only $1 per lesson in the very beginning.
And everyone paid by the week. Eventually she moved to Arthur Avenue in South Beach, where she rented a larger space, and she stayed there for many years before we came here in New Dorp. We're here just shy under 50 years now, this
Sure.
building.
And it just grew and grew.
In 2004, our mom, the late Mrs. Rosemary, and my sisters and I, we established a nonprofit organization to save the St. George Theater from being torn down. Well, at that time, it was in disrepair, and the theater was a white elephant, and Hyatt Street was a ghost town. You know, at the time when my mom heard the theater was going to be torn down, she felt we had to do something. She grew up in this theater. She had great memories. We hosted dance recitals there in the 60s and a little bit in the 70s. So she felt the need to save and preserve this beautiful jewel of a theater. So here we are today in 2022, and the St. George Theater is a vibrant performing arts center for Staten Island. We have 1,900 seats, and we host a myriad of activities, from educational programs, outreach programs, to really cool concerts.
So not only was St. George area a ghost town, but the theater itself was padlocked for over 30 years, and a passerby would never know the rich history behind those gates. And the theater itself was just a shell of a theater. There was no seats, no stage, no lights, no running water, no restrooms. It was a wreck. My mom used to say the only ones finding comfort in the theater were the raccoons and the birds, and that's the truth. And now the theater is thriving, and it's beautiful.
What most folks don't realize is, you know, we host, you know, the most exciting and fabulous shows. But with these shows, you know, the income pays for the shows in itself. It doesn't pay for these multi-million-dollar restoration projects. I mean, we're truly grateful to all the elected officials on Staten Island, because without their support and without Chuck Schumer's support, we wouldn't be where we are today with the restoration.
Dancing School has been involved in the New York community for about close to 50 years now, and we've certainly seen the lane change and grow with new businesses come and go. And it's always been a close-knit feel. You strolling the lane, walk the lane, and it really is a great community with great events that we always participate in. We always love taking part with our dancers, going out to entertain, whether it's the restaurant crawl or the spring fling carnival on the lane, the car show. We love getting involved in our community. Since the New Dorp bid began, we've seen some nice changes. I mean, we've always kept our property immaculate and well maintained. I think what the bid did, though, it brought the businesses together. It made us closer. You know, from the steering committee of getting it all going to forming the board of directors. It brought the local businesses together and closer, which is great. And it's great that we all get together and market the lane together. All the local businesses as the New Dorp merchants, the New Dorp community. It's a great feeling.
For many years, the New Dorp Civic Association would host an annual Christmas caroling where they would walk along the side streets of New Dorp Lane and down New Dorp Lane and sing for everyone. And it always began here at the dance studio. And we were so happy to host the commencement. We would serve hot cocoa and cookies before the very talented singers and residents of the area took to the streets to sing. It was nice.
The New Dorp Civic Association, they've done some wonderful things on the lane as well. And now it's continued with the tree lighting that we do. We see New Dorp neighborhood changing and growing through the years. We see just as many families and new families moving into the area, and they are just as engaged as they always were. We see just as many families and new families moving into the area, and they are just as engaged as they always were. Walking the lane, enjoying from Millerfield all the way up to dancing school here to the railroad. Whether they're dining or shopping or just strolling the lane. We definitely see the families engaged. And even with all the new events that the bid offers, with the restaurant crawls and the car shows, that brings families together to enjoy the lane even more.
Hi, my name is Ron Hill. I'm the co-owner of JHU Comic Books on Dorp Lane on Staten Island. My grandmother moved to Dorp in the late 70s, and I started living in Dorp probably around 1980. I was in the 6th grade in 1980, the year The Empire Strikes Back came out, and I used to walk up from Dorp Beach to a movie theater called the Fox Twin Theater, where the summer of 1980 I saw The Empire Strikes Back 5 times. So as an 11-year-old, I used to wander the streets, and it was a magical time in Dorp. Summer 1983, my old boss Jim Hamley opened his first store in Dorp Lane in June of '83. It was called the Fantastic Store. It was originally called the Merchant of Venus, but he had to change the name, so it was the Fantastic Store. I showed up on day one. He wasn't ready to open, so I went behind the store by the exits of the Dorp Lane of the Lane Theater, and I sat in the sidewalk. And they said, "Hey kid, are you gonna sit there all day?" I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna wait for you to open. I don't want to have to walk back down Dorp Lane. It's hot out." They're like, "Would you like to help?" I said, "Sure." So they gave me a broom, and I started working comics at the age of 14. So that was his original store. Jim had some problems with his original partner. He branched off and started Jim Hamley's Universe in 1985 in Eltingville, and then had a successful run in Eltingville. Eventually opened up a store in the mall in 1989. We had a short-term lease, and by the end of the lease, we decided not to stay in the mall. So we moved back to Dorp Lane. By that point, Jim's original partner had closed down shop, and we opened up on Dorp Lane in 1990. And Jim Hamley's Universe operated on Dorp Lane from 1990 to 2013. He retired in 2013, and that's when me and Nick tweaked the name and reincorporated as JHU Comic Books. So the original location of the store was right next to the Lane Theater. That was the Fantastic Store. Then there was a location that was across the street from the old Mike's Place Diner, which is now A.F. Bennett. That was the store that we moved out of the mall. Then we were on the corner of Clawson and Dorp Lane, and then finally this location. So there's been a total of 4 different comic stores on Dorp Lane since 1983. Different locations. Same people, different companies, 3 different companies. Dorp as a community has largely the same as when I was a child. There's many things about Dorp, the homes and the people living here. It's a lot of people I've known for decades upon decades. It's always been a middle-class neighborhood, friendly people. When I think back to the 80s, it's very similar to how it is now. Dorp Lane as a whole has kind of gone on through the years and always had a similar vibe and character. Back in the 1980s, Dorp Lane had maybe a slightly different variety of stores and mom and pop shops. There were a lot more, there was a television repair place and a shoe repair guy, and now these days it seems a little bit more in the world of nail salons and karate studios. A little bit more on the personal maintenance things are happening now, as opposed to the past, where it was more of a general shopping area, and now it feels a little different in terms of the offerings of the establishments. The first thing about the bid is that they seem to be always promoting activities on the lane. If we're doing something, they always repost it in their social media. They've made efforts to put up flags and provide graphics to identify the area as a place. It was definitely in the 80s. There wasn't this kind of unifying graphics and themes that you see now on Dorp Lane, where they put a flag in front of our store. It says comics, and there's different markers to indicate the different types of businesses. It didn't feel as unified. It feels a little more of like a community now, because there are some people actively working for the community. And if there was a problem, you could contact them and they try to help. There was nobody in the past that I remember. There's all kinds of great shops and great merchants here. All the people at the library are very hardworking. It's a great library. Right next door to the bookstore. You can come here, buy some books, and go take some books out there. You could have a really nice afternoon, get a lot of entertainment by coming to Dorp, coming to our store and checking out some of these spots. right over here between on New Dorp Lane between Clawson and Edison.
My name is Carmine DeSantis. I'm the president of PS Finance. My business has been on New Dorp Lane for approximately 20 years. I'm an attorney, and I also run PS Finance, a litigation funding firm. My role in the New Dorp bid is president. The New Dorp community has evolved since I've been there through connection and communication. When I first arrived on New Dorp Lane, we did have a merchant group, but it really wasn't well attended. Today, we speak regularly, we interact with the New Dorp community more. The lane is cleaner, as we have a cleaning service there now. It has evolved in a positive way. Our local bid has brought everyone together. I know more of the merchants. We do work together for common goals. We have some fantastic events, and we do meet the locals at our events because we do draw thousands of people. The New Dorp bid has brought many events to New Dorp. We have a restaurant crawl, which brings in 6,000 to 8,000 people and have about 25 to 30 restaurants participate. We have a car show that brings between 400 to 500 cars to the lane. And we also have participation from local businesses. We have a Christmas tree lighting. We have many children events, and it does bring in a lot of the local people. With the events and the businesses that we have on New Dorp Lane, I'm getting a sense that the relationship between the businesses and the local community is getting stronger as we see greater attendance and we get great feedback from these individuals who live around the New Dorp Lane area. The members of the bid are excited about working with the residents of New Dorp, and we are confident that we will make the New Dorp community a better place to live.